It's important to understand, even though I'm going to still see people in the comment sections that do not get this. I'm not justifying the way things are, I'm just explaining them. Okay, so in this video, I'll explain to you how censorship works in the game development industry. A lot of people believe that you can just make whatever game you want and then just sell it. But that's not how it works. There are many institutions, there are many places that will try to censor you the moment you decide to make a video game. And the first barrier you're going to come across are government organizations. So world governments, they have their own censorship laws when it comes to video games. Like some governments do not like if you mention alcohol or tobacco in your video games. Other governments do not like if you mention any type of hate speech in your video games. And that's incredibly subjective. And you can also apply it to video games that existed in the past. So things like GTA, which existed in the past, would probably not be made now because certain governments would actually ban that game. And after you're looking at all of the different legislations and all of the different countries in the world and what they censor and what they don't, then you have to look at the platforms. So, okay, you've made the game, it cost you a couple of $100 million to make. Which platforms do you want to sell it on? And you're kind of limited. Like if you want to sell it on PC, it's probably Steam and Epic. And there's a couple of other platforms, but they're not as profitable. And then the consoles, PS5, Xbox, and Nintendo. And all of these places have their own censorship regulations. So for instance, if you want to sell it on Steam, well, they can say that they don't want any hate speech in their video game. So if you make a video game in the style of Postal or in the style of Manhunt, you may get into trouble. If you're looking at consoles like Sony, they may say, oh, we're fine with promoting games rated M for mature, but we do not want to promote games rated AO, which is adult only. And if you're looking at the difference in rating, it's very subjective. Like for instance, a game like Manhunt can receive the AO rating even though it doesn't have like any visible nudity in it, but it's the over-the-top violence. While a game like Mortal Kombat that also has over-the-top violence that does get to be promoted. So once you're finished with the censorship that comes from world governments, and then you go through the censorship that comes from the platforms, you hit with the censorship that comes from the publisher. So a lot of upstarting developers, they need a publisher because it promotes them, it gives them access to more resources. In some cases, the publisher may actually give funding themselves. And they may say, well, yeah, but these types of themes are against our corporate brand. We do not like them. We do not appreciate the way you're conducting your game. So you need to take those censorships into account. And finally, you also need money for your game. Now, if your game is a AAA title that costs hundreds of millions of dollars, unless you're friends with a Muslim sheikh that has oil in his backyard, you're going to look at some crowdfunding options. And those are usually websites like Kickstarter, like Patreon, and they have their own terms of service. Like, for instance, Patreon, if your game has romance or anything sexual remoted, you're not allowed to have hypnosis in it. It's very bizarre. Like, world governments are fine with that, but even Steam is fine with that, but Patreon isn't. So you can run into that type of censorship. So you got to take that into account, that if you decide to go with the banks and you may want to make a loan that's based on ESG, then you need to hire a consultancy group like Sweet Baby. So you got censorship coming from the government, you got censorship coming from the publisher, you got censorship coming from the platforms, and then of course the credit card companies, they have their own rules and regulations, and then they have their own censorship. So all in all, what I'm trying to say is that it's not like back in the day. Back in the day, you could have made a video game about whatever you wanted, and you could sell it. So the company that made GTA also made the video game called Manhunt, which was a commercial success and many people liked it. But the company is ashamed of that game. They will never bring it up. They will never mention it. You're never going to see a remake of it because the violence in that game is over the top. And the theme in that game is not acceptable today. But the reality is that if you want to make a AAA game, it's not just a very expensive endeavor. You also get pressure from all of these types of groups with various interests, with various regulations, and I'm genuinely curious if the average gamer is even aware of this, which is why I even decided to make the video, is to explain to people that we do not live in 2010. Now, I do not know how we can turn the needle back to 2010, because most of the censorship doesn't really come from the industry itself. It's not like self-imposed at the corporate level. It's usually through government legislation, and then you have the policy of the banks, and the banks really don't care about the gaming industry as a whole. Even if the gaming industry collapses, the banks are still fine. And then you have the payment processors with the credit card companies, and everyone censors in one way or another. Again, like things like alcohol or drug use or various themes, even if your game is rated M for mature, you may run afoul of various regulations. But the thing that I find interesting is Sony, right? So now Sony is in hot water for censoring Stellar Blade. And the reason for that is that their censorship doesn't really make sense. First of all, you got games like Baldur's Gate where people can be fully naked. You can even have physics for the penises, and that's fine. And then you have video games like The Last of Us 2, which has an actual porn scene in it, and that's fine. But they draw the line at Stellar Blade because she is dressed too risque. And the censorship that they had was also very bizarre. Like, they barely covered anything. It's just like they decided to censor a little bit for the sake of censorship. But the thing that really bewilders me, and this is what I genuinely do not understand, is why the day one censorship? Because we're talking about a very popular game that had many trailers. People knew exactly the type of content that they can expect. They knew that the game is going to be somewhat of a success. And yet they decided to censor it on day one. And the only thing that I can think of is that they genuinely tried to upset the player base of Stellar Blade. To antagonize the player base. And to make the creators of Stellar Blade look bad. The way it works on Steam, like I don't know how it works on Sony, but I can assume it's the same on Steam, is that if you have a game, you submit it for a review. And the reviewers try to see if your game is legit or not, because there have been games that were hoaxes, so they want to see that there's an actual game in there. They want to see if your game manages to abide by Steam's terms of service, so if you don't have any hate speech in it, if you're basically making a safer word game, but it has adult content, that would flag it. So they have ample time to play it, and after they play it, they give you the go-ahead. And if they gave you the go-ahead, there may be like another search as it goes through the process in order to make sure that you didn't update anything that they don't like in the game. And then it's go. Like, then it goes to the market. And this is not what happened with Stellar Blade. Like, with Stellar Blade, it seems that they got the approval from Sony. I find it difficult to believe that, especially since it's a PlayStation exclusive, that they didn't have representatives from Sony working with the team and seeing what the team was doing. So it's just so freaking bizarre that it's like, okay, literally day one, they're censoring the game. So they couldn't censor it like 2 months earlier, or, you know, after they released the trailer, they couldn't add the censorship in. No, they have to add it day one. Which, the only thing that I can explain is that the journalists whined and complained and pressured Sony to do this so that the publisher looks bad in the eyes of the players. But that's my opinion. Let me know what you guys think. If you have a different take on it, I'm willing to hear it. And I will see you all in the comment section. Take care.